Hello folks, hope you're well. Phil here. Just wanted to do a quick podcast on some of the coverage that's been taking place regarding the potential Qatari takeover, some of the moral hand wringing, which I welcome. But I want to extrapolate something and look at the bigger picture because there's been some things that I've found to be quite interesting. I've read articles that Manchester United's soul is up for sale, and there's a dangerous precedent that could be set here. First of all, the precedent for oil money was set long, long ago. It was set whenever Manchester City were bought by UAE. The time to pontificate and moralise about this was then. The time to pontificate and moralise about dirty money in football has long since gone, many of which the people who are hand-wringing right now are beneficiaries of. It's great to see the media finally find the moral compass, but let's go back to 2005, when Manchester United fans were protesting the Glazer takeover. And United fans went to the government. They were laughed at. They begged for football governance to stop this type of ownership model, which has led to where we're at today, which is entirely predictable as to where we're at today. United fans were called anti-American, even anti-Semitic by some, which is utterly ridiculous. And in fact, many journalists who oppose the Glazers quite vociferously right now didn't find their voice until Ferguson left the football club. There are a few exceptions, of course, notably Daniel Taylor, one of the best journalists in the country, who was a vocal critic of this from day one. There's others, of course, apologies if I haven't mentioned them, but there are others. But one thing that's never been in question is the moral consistency of Manchester United fans. Regardless of where they come from, the owners, Manchester United fans have always protested. They've always protested bad ownership. They protested Martin Edwards. They protested at Cheltenham over Cubic Express and JP McManus and Magnier. They protested the Glazer ownership, and the great unwashed, the United fans that did this, warned exactly where this was going. So where we're at right now shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, but the internet doesn't forget. So a lot of the people who work for newspapers, who are owned by despots themselves, who wear their bigotry as a badge of honour, who have defended illegal wars, who have defended genocide, who have defended a horrendous treatment of migrants, now all of a sudden want to put United through a moral compass and calibrate that in a way that they don't for anyone else. Roman Abramovich and his money was not a surprise. His perestroika wasn't a surprise. I know what people are going to say, UK libel laws, of course, yeah, we know. But there's lots of ways around that. The Sun used to, of course, own the New York Post. I don't know if they still do, but they would often put stories in the New York Post to get around libel laws and then reprint them in the UK. It can be done. The UK government didn't decide and discover just immediately after the Russian invasion of Ukraine that Roman Abramovich and his propinquity to Putin was something to be concerned about. This was well known, of course. Chelsea fans hang banners in their stadium, lauding their owners, sing songs wanting them back, and the coverage is almost non-existent. Manchester City current owners may not even be their worst in the last 20 years. Thaksin Shinawatra somehow passed a fit and proper test. It's almost like he didn't happen. Someone that executed addicts, right? Someone that has a horrendous human rights record. And the Manchester City current owners will need no further extrapolation on their human rights record. Now, a lot of journalists, when questioned on this, were moral relativists. Who cares about the source of the money? Who cares about Chelsea's source of money? Everyone's got dirty money. Now, Manchester United fans were begging the media to get on board with their aversion to the Glazers, but for years they were slandered. They got no support. They got no support from those who could have lent it. They have begged for financial governance in football at all levels to prevent this type of ownership. When you want to talk about precedent, the Glazers set a precedent. That precedent resulted in Hicks and Gillette at Liverpool. There would have never been Hicks and Gillette at Liverpool, which almost bankrupted the football club, had there not have been a Glazer ownership model. No question about it. And now that it's safe to do so and it's expedient to do so, we see everyone coming out en masse, safety in numbers, criticising the Glazers. Because now it's easy. But where were you when we needed you? Football used to be a millionaire's playground. It's not even a billionaire's playground anymore. It's not the result. It's not Manchester United fans that need to be questioned. And the fact that you now need state money, state oil money to compete is a natural consequence of ignoring this problem for decades. Ignoring the Greatest Good League for decades. This was obvious where it was going. So if you really want to protest about the soul of football, look, football clubs were funded by Pablo Escobar. They've been used as money laundering outfits for decades. Gazprom, the source of their money. The governing body of the entire sport was up to its neck in corruption. Right? The corruption runs right through football, from top to bottom. So it's great that people now are finding their moral compass, but I ask you, where have you been? Manchester City, the Manchester Evening News did not want to send a reporter to cover the Barry Bannell trial. I assume to protect access. This is something, of course, Daniel Taylor highlighted. I'm just a scrope that likes football. But somehow I found the budget to fly two of the people involved in that Barry Bannell trial out to New York to get around UK libel laws to cover it because I thought it was so important. But somehow the UK media couldn't do something similar, with the exception of a few. So it's great to see the media now finally saying Manchester United's soul is up for sale. Manchester United's soul belongs to its fans, just like every other football club. And it's not up to fans to enact fit and proper tests. It's not up to fans to... We have no control over who owns our football clubs. And Manchester United fans have always separated the morality of their owners from that of the football club. I understand City, for example. No disrespect to City, but had Abu Dhabi bought Leyton Orient, they'd be in exactly the same position. City's success is a direct consequence of that investment, so I can understand why they don't want to criticise their owners. Chelsea's success is a direct consequence of Abramovich's money. I can understand why they don't want to criticise it. PSG, in exactly the same situation, right? But Manchester United don't need a Qatari owner to come in and bring European Cups. We know how that feels to win a European Cup. City fans don't. PSG fans don't. We know how it feels to win the biggest trophies in world football. These other fans don't. Newcastle, bought by Saudis, they had their kit changed. Is it Newcastle fans' fault? Is it even Eddie Howe's fault? No. It's up to the governing bodies to make sure this type of ownership doesn't happen. Football isn't even a billionaire's playground now. It's state oil playground now. And should you be saying to Manchester United, you are not allowed to compete? This is the reason why United and Liverpool are for sale. Because these owners can see the writing on the wall. Where this is going. Had you have appealed for regulation that applies to everybody, then I'm on board with you. You sit in Manchester City's lounges. You sit in Newcastle's lounges. You sit in Chelsea's lounges. And almost no coverage is given. We had to listen to people talk about Pep Guardiola and Manchester City being arguably the greatest Premier League team I've ever seen, without a hint of irony about the source of that money and the financial doping and the obvious consequence, the obvious sequela to that was going to lead to state ownership of Premier League football clubs. Obviously. This is not just a problem for Manchester United, this is a problem for everyone else in the league. Tottenham Hotspur are for sale for the same reason. It's going to affect everybody. When United fans were pleading for the media to get on board, they were ignored. Even in 2010. Because of why? To protect access. They knew what Ferguson would have said. Once Ferguson went, then there was a bit of courage in the coverage. In fact, some of the most barbarous criticism of the Glazers came from someone who worked for Liverpool TV, and I believe she's married to Sadio Mane. Melissa Reddy, I give her all the credit in the world. She was the one that came out and called them parasites. You'll notice I haven't had a Manchester United player on my podcast for a year or so at least, because I was told that was a result of my criticism of the Glazers. That's a price I'm willing to pay. I'm willing to pay that because I believe that these people put Manchester United in a situation where now they need something like state ownership, oil money, to fix the problems that exist at the football club, fix the decrepit stadium, invest in the squad, to do all the things that they need to be competitive at the top of the Premier League. So it's too late, lads and lasses, to complain about the morality of this. It's too late to now be concerned about state ownership of football clubs. The time for gatekeeping is gone. That was the time for gatekeeping on this and to be legitimately concerned about this was a long time ago. But what are you willing to pay morally to defend your stance? The English FA weren't willing to take a booking to defend their morals, as many other football associations weren't. What are you willing to do in the media? Because many of you are working for newspapers that defend the indefensible every single day. Miguel Delaney, I will accept, he has been consistent on this. I have to say, he's been very good. Always been critical of this type of ownership. I don't want to see people like this own Manchester United. I never have. But it's not Manchester United fans' moral consistency that's up for debate here. It's yours. It's the media's. When we needed a voice, it wasn't there. MUTV wouldn't allow criticism of the Glazers without hanging up on you. Where were you when we needed you? Whenever the 1958 were protesting at Old Trafford. Whenever Manchester United fans were consistently protesting, they were constantly maligned. Manchester United fans have never been found wanting when it comes to the criticism of their owners, which is not something that can be said for everyone else. We unfortunately live in a world where football and sport is awash with dirty money and has been for a long, long time. So the hand-wringing on this about, oh my God, this could ruin football, ruin fucking football, are you insane? I mean, the FBI launched an investigation into the most senior member in the sport. They're all up to their neck in corruption. But it's this that's going to break football. Don't come at me with that shit. You've all been too late to the party, lads. The time to protest about this has long since gone. Liverpool. Same people want to buy United were trying to buy Liverpool. I barely remember an article about this, about Liverpool's soul being up for sale. The soul was sold long ago. Long ago. And none of you cared, or few of you cared. I remember some of the insults that were levelled at me for criticising the Glazers. I remember some of the insults that were levelled at United fans who care about the football club into their soul by those in the media. And the internet doesn't forget, so it's all there by Google search. And it's great that you've now found your moral compass. When I ask you, where has it been? So when it comes to putting the Qataris through, and just like Jim Ratcliffe or anyone else should be put through exactly the same scrutiny, exactly the same. The problem is the precedent was set long ago. So there is no more legal or even consistently ethical grounds for the media or football to oppose it, because the floodgates opened long ago. So opposing this on ethical grounds is great, but make sure you do the same at Manchester City. Make sure you do exactly the same at Newcastle. Make sure you do the same at PSG. Because when I see them play in the Champions League, there's almost no mention of it. There's almost no man. Pep Guardiola vociferously came out and defended his football club. How many people are turning around and consistently criticising Manchester City and the source of that money? Almost none. And I keep hearing the reason is libel laws. That's a weak excuse. So I want Manchester United to be owned by responsible people. I felt that way before. I've always felt that way. I want the football club run that's commensurate with its values, that's commensurate with its identity. I don't want to see someone come in and use this as their plaything, right? But here's the reality. when everyone was getting celebrity out of the growth of the Premier League and their wages were going up and they were getting jobs here and getting jobs there, everyone was on the gravy train. The only people that didn't benefit from that was the fans. Fans' ticket prices went up. We're the only ones. We don't get paid to cover football. We pay to cover football. So our skin in the game is totally different. But we rely on people with big platforms to try to help so that it remains affordable, so that it remains accessible for kids. But when you're sitting in those lounges, I know it's hard to criticize those people because you're out drinking with press secretaries, you're out drinking with communication directors and everything, and you're trying to thread the needle between making sure you don't criticize too hard and you lose access. Like Daniel Taylor was banned from Old Trafford for doing something similar. At least he has the courage of his convictions to do what he did. How many other people do that? There's some exceptional journalists out there, don't get me wrong, I'm not criticising them all, but there is a lot right now. From the safety and because it's expedient to do so, when this takeover hasn't gone through yet, morally proselytizing when they were vacant long ago. Well, there was none of that when we needed it. Do a Google search right now. See how many journalists criticize United fans for being anti-American. So by the same token, are you anti-Qatari? Or do you have legitimate moral objections to what's going on? I won't do that. I won't impose that on you. I won't turn around and claim that your position is motivated by prejudice like you did with Manchester United fans. I won't do that. If we have a football manager that comes out and defends, the conduct of our owners, they'll criticise him. Alex Ferguson defended the Glazers. Take a look at the Glazers' track record. These are people that sued their own family into oblivion. These are people that were sued for raising the rent on people in trailer parks for the audacity of having children and pets. These are people that were sued by Harley Davidson for illegally inflating stocks. Right? I mean, their track record is out there for everyone to see. Their conduct wasn't a shock to anyone. Well, where were you? And it was easier to criticize United fans. You see, this was before social media. This was before now that the internet keeps a record of all of this. It's all there. So, I have no doubt that you have legitimate objections to Qataris. I do too. I have legitimate objections to anyone that the source of the money comes from people who deny others human rights. My entertainment is not more important than someone's human rights. But don't you dare ask me to legitimize your moral consistency when few of you, have been able in the past to put an asterisk beside the success of certain clubs who are financially doped to the eyeballs. Take a look at the coverage of Arsenal City at the weekend. City are back. A week before, 101 financial charges. Not convictions, charges to be fair. Almost like it didn't happen. So, instead of questioning whether the soul of Manchester United is for sale, the soul of football was sold long ago and you helped in that. Recognise your role in that. You were paid to do so. So, when I read these hand-wringing articles about football and Manchester United and they're sold up for sale and all this nonsense, are you serious? You think we're stupid? I mean, you don't think we pay attention? You don't think we've been watching this financial skullduggery forever? Take a look at what's happened at lower league football. Did football governance protect them? Where were you in asking them to be protected? Did you boycott? Did you refuse to go? Super League was a consequence of the avarice of owners. This was all entirely predictable. So what you have now with state-owned football clubs is partly a consequence of your cooperation and your refusal to do anything other than mealy-mouthed objections to this. So until I see Manchester City sold up for sale, until I see Manchester City or Newcastle or Chelsea or anything else about dangerous precedents being set, I don't believe that you actually believe what you're writing. Or maybe it's just because it's Manchester United that they're held to a different standard. Perhaps, I don't know. So, I don't know what's going to happen with this takeover. There's obviously lots of people interested. My guess is it probably will be the Qataris. But if this is a thing that causes the vast majority of the media to be morally consistent, great. But I predict what will happen is this. If the Qataris buy Manchester United, the criticism will get silenced really quickly. Because people are going to start thinking about access. People are going to start thinking about, is this in my best interests to take a moral stand when it has a personal consequence to me? I'm going to say 80% of you will say no. And you'll use libel laws as a way of protecting yourself. And that's okay. But don't dare go on Twitter or social media and ask Manchester United fans about their moral consistency. Because if there's one thing that Manchester United fans have been from as long as I've been a United fan, is they'd be morally consistent about objecting to their owners. How many other football clubs do you see protest their owners in the way that Manchester United fans have? And it's not just due to the financial mismanagement of the football club. Lots of us have been highlighting the obvious ethical problems. Lots of us about who these people are. That's all I have to say.